Hello, welcome to today's session. SDI, what is it and who does it? My name is Kim Snowball from NKCES, and I will be your facilitator today. So let's get started. First, SDI stands for Specially Designed Instruction. The name in itself can be deconstructed to help you have a vague understanding, but today we are taking a deeper dive. Having a clear understanding of specially designed instruction is really the goal of today's session. There are many misconceptions, but one we need to debunk is that SDI should live in the world of special education. Today, we need to be thinking about the second part of today's title, who does it? And that is where we will address the roles and the responsibilities of both the general education teacher and the special education teacher with respect to SDI. So let's just take a moment to ask yourself these questions. And how would you respond? In your handout, you should actually have space to write. What SDI are you or your collaborating teacher using? Which IEP goals or learning characteristics is this SDI addressing? And how effective is the SDI currently being implemented? How is it being documented? And what evidence do you have that you are systematically delivering SDI? You might be a general education teacher. You might be a special education teacher coming to this. But we need to be thinking, do we have the answers? And if not, should we all be understanding that we play a role in specially designed instruction within your classroom? So take a minute. Jot down your thoughts. You can hit pause. Okay. So here is a slide that comes from Brooks Publishing. And I thought you might appreciate just reading through it and understanding a little bit about fairness within a classroom. Because in my own classroom, I used to hang a poster that defined fairness as this. Fair does not mean treating everyone the same. It means striving to meet individual needs. So take a few minutes and just read through it and see if it helps with a little clarity of where SDI and fairness come into play. Now, if you're not familiar with the guidance document for individual education in the IEP development, you might not really understand the depth of what the definition for specially designed instruction is. So we want to take some time to actually dive into it and break it down. Specially designed instruction is what the teacher does. It's a doing. It's to instruct, to assess, and to reteach the student. Remember, SDI can be done in the general education classroom or can be done in a resource room, but it's not about the place. We're going to reiterate that in the next slide as well. It describes how the teacher adapts the content, the methodology, the delivery of the instruction, so that students and their unique needs can be met. To ensure that the student with a disability has access to the general curriculum. That's the important piece. As I said earlier, it's not a place, but it's the service that is taking place. So it's what the teacher is doing. And so when we walk into a classroom, we think, oh, that definitely is SDI, because look, they're in groups. They've got a small group and a large group, or they've got multiple groups. That in itself is not the SDI. Okay, that's a place. And so we want to be thinking about what is going on within the groups. Remember, it's what the teacher is doing during this time with the students to instruct, assess, and reteach. So Dr. Marilyn Friend, in her webinar in 2019, actually put it pretty clear. She gave some examples of what you might see if you walk into a classroom. If you're an educator visiting another classroom or an administrator, it's what you see and hear that's addressing the needs of the student, the individual needs. So you might see a special education teacher teaching a learning strategy to a small group of students or a single student. You might see a special education teacher teaching or supporting a self-regulation strategy. Or you might actually see a special education teacher with the general education teacher teaching replacement behavior that you find that the student has in their behavior intervention plan. So it's what the teacher is doing that we have to be paying attention to, not the location in the classroom. Remember, this specially designed instruction is strategic, it's intensive, and it's carefully designed. We also need to make sure that we're collecting data so that we ensure students with disabilities can be successful within the classroom. Some additional examples that you might find within the IEP can be found in the IEP Lesson Plan Development Handbook. And there are links at the end of your original handout that guide you through this session that you can quickly access these documents. Help you dive a little deeper if you're wanting additional information. So you might see explicit instruction. In explicit instruction, you might be thinking the I do, the we do, the you do, but it's more than that. It's, vocabulary instruction, scaffolding instruction, time delays, modeling how to respond to visual prompts. It can be all the way down to transferring from a student from a wheelchair, or planning a sensory diet. But they're designed to meet the individual needs of the student based on their IEP goals and the deficits that you find in an IEP to level that playing field. So who's responsible for it? Who does this? Well, first and foremost, SDI must be provided by a special education teacher or a qualified related service provider. And that in itself sometimes is a misconception. Now remember that SDI is planned, designed, and may be delivered through an integrated and collaborative format or model as co-teaching. But we're going to dive a little bit into that just so that you can see what does that even look like in the general education setting. So roles and responsibilities. Again, who's responsible for it? That general education teacher is responsible for SDI after initially delivered by the special education teacher. It may be replicated, like I said, and extend the SDI to provide for generalization. The general education teacher is responsible for the macro planning. I feel like this is the big piece that sometimes gets missed. Special education teachers cannot design their SDI within the lesson plan, the daily lessons, if there hasn't been transparency and communication through the big picture. Macro planning a unit. What are the key ideas? And we'll look at a format that might help you bridge this gap. These weekly lesson plans need to be shared with teachers so that we are not coming in and being reactionary with students, but intentionally planning. So remember, the general education teacher in most states is not responsible primarily for delivering the SDI. In a general education setting, special education teachers need to remember that they are not there to be another general education teacher, but they're there to deliver the SDI. That's their primary role. And so they need to be doing the planning of it, the delivering of it intentionally, carefully documenting it, systematically evaluating it, and adjusting it based on data. That's their primary role. So, as I mentioned earlier, the macro planning should include discussions on IEP goals based on the students that are in your classroom, the students that you're working together to be successful. Remember, it's not your students and my students, it's our students. So when we think about we're planning the students, we're planning this year's lessons, we need to be thinking about who's sitting in our desks and what can we do so that everyone is successful. BASE is a model, and so when we think about the planning, big ideas should be listed so that the special education teacher can see what is the main purpose of this unit. Then together you're going to be looking at analyzing the difficulties that you anticipate. As Dr. Archer says, if you expect it, pre-correct it. So we're going to be looking at what do we anticipate to be some difficulties within this unit. And then we're going to be putting in some strategies and supports in place so that all students can be successful. And those strategies and supports will be the appropriate SDIs that will target the individual needs of the student. And then afterwards or during, we're going to be evaluating the success and do we need more? Do we need less? Can we pull away or should we dive deeper with the supports? We need to be thinking about how will we weave the SDIs within the daily lesson plans? And then how will we be collecting data during our lessons so that we can then keep that in the planning process so that it's effective? This can happen if all the lessons and all the planning is done in isolation. So teachers need access, special education teachers need access to the lesson plans prior to the day before. It's the same as with good planning. You have this plan put in place. You're not winging it each day. You're not being reactionary. So a powerful piece is the weekly lesson plans to help teachers, after they have the big ideas, the macro planning, then let's look at individual students and what they need that week. So let's look at a model that Dr. Marilyn Friend shared with us during her webinar in one of the handouts. And so remember, we're purposely planning it, intentionally delivering it, carefully documenting it. And if an SDI is being delivered within the co-taught classroom, then the first thing that we need to be thinking about, how can we make sure that both the gen ed teacher and the special education teachers are on the same page? And just by tweaking our lesson plans, we can easily add 2 columns. If we're doing a co-teaching approach, then we might want to be putting down which co-teaching approach we're using. And then within that, what are we doing? And so that the general education teacher can recognize that specially designed instruction is being delivered within that classroom, and they could support it. The other piece that I want to make sure that, we just take note, if we're going to have an opportunity right now to say that when we're doing one teach, one observe, that's really a great model to use for data collection. And when we're doing specially designed instruction, the other piece is that the one teach, one assist is really not being utilized unless there is a substitute special education teacher that is coming in. So let's just take a moment to reflect back on the beginning of the session. You were asked a few questions to reflect on. Can you answer the questions with clarity now? If you set these systems into place, what would you say? When someone said, hey, what are the SDIs you or your collaborating teacher are using? If you have lesson plans put in place where you both, whether you are the general education teacher or the special education teacher, would you have answers any day of the week? Which IEP goals or learning characteristics is the SDI addressing? If you're doing macro planning, you're discussing the goals of the students. And so both teachers would be able to have these answers. How effective is the SDI currently being implemented? As the lessons in the unit is progressing, sharing the data is important. How is it being documented? Well, first off, if you have a lesson plan in place where actually you're writing in the SDIs each week, you have a clear documentation of which SDI is being implemented, when, and during what unit. And then sharing the evidence that you have systematically delivered the SDI. So these pieces are critical. At the end of today's session, our ultimate goal is that you have a clearer understanding of SDI, especially design instruction, what it is and who does it, and that you keep in mind that all kids are our kids as we move forward. Thank you.